Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Guidance Corner. My name's Christelle. In this week's discussion, we're going to be talking about resistance. What does it mean? How does it show up in our lives? How to recognize the signs that we're actually resisting, and then what to do. So, resistance is when there's a push-pull within us. Resistance is when we don't want to. In order to have resistance, there's got to be something that we feel we have to do. So there's a should. And sometimes it's a should. We should be doing this. We're shoulding ourselves. Sometimes it's an obligation or something that we see as an obligation, and therefore there's resistance. We don't want to do it. So we need to ask ourselves, why don't we want to do it? And I guess before we even ask that question, we need to identify what it is that we are resisting. We know what resistance is. We understand it in a very logical way, in a very intellectual way. But how can we recognize the presence that it has in our life? How can we recognize when resistance is at play in our life? So let's have a look at what are some of the symptoms of resistance. They will be a little bit like our map to help us, or maybe even guide us, to see where we might be in resistance in our life. But before we go there, why is it even important? Why does resistance play such a big part in our life? Why is it important to be able to identify the signs? So when we are in resistance, there's this push-pull within us. This creates unhappiness. Resistance creates unhappiness within us. It also creates mental blocks. It creates emotions, and it can even lead to physical symptoms in our body. Why? Why is resistance so powerful within us as human beings? And that's because it breaks the flow. So, and the flow, what I mean by flow, and I want to really explain this so we understand we're on the same level. The flow is not our habits. It's not our comfort zones. When we operate in the flow, it means that we accept where we are right now. When we operate in the flow, it doesn't mean that everything is perfect. It doesn't mean that we are doing exactly what we want to do every minute of the day. Operating in the flow is knowing that there'll be good moments, bad moments, of course. There's contrast. And I'll link the video up the top here or in the end page. And that's the video on contrast, how we all live in contrast. Back to the flow. So when we flow with life, there's an ease. And again, it doesn't mean that everything's perfect, but there's an ease. And that's because there's no resistance. Not because there's no obstacles. Not because, like I said earlier, we're doing everything we want to do or everything's going the way we want it to go. The flow is us just understanding that there'll be good days and bad days. The flow is understanding that some days we're not at our 100%. Some days we don't want to do this, or we don't want to do that. Some days we'd rather just throw the bed covers over our head and call it a day. Just literally just say, you know what, not today. But, in an ideal world, we could do that. But we live in this reality. And in this reality, we have jobs and we have commitments. Having said that, just as a little side note, we also do need to listen to ourselves. If you're unwell, then sometimes calling it a day is what you need to do. Sometimes we need to say, I'm sorry, today I can't. Okay. But for the purpose of this discussion, this resistance discussion, this is not when we are unwell, though resistance does show up in our physical bodies. Okay, so resistance can make us unwell. But for the purpose of this video, this discussion, I want to kind of put that aside, if I may, and talk about resistance and flow, being in the flow in the sense of our everyday life. Okay, so we can't take a day off from work every day. So, and this is also, sometimes we need those days off, but in this discussion, it's how to recognize resistance so we can tap back into being in the flow so we can actually function in our everyday life. Okay, so sometimes we need to, what I call, tap out and go, you know what, today I'm not well, I can't. I know that one day's rest will mean that for the rest of the week, I can function at a much higher level. Or I am unwell, taking a day will help. Okay, so we need to be really mindful about where we're actually at. So I think I've kind of covered. I'm hoping that you'll understand what I mean by being in the flow, and I'm sure you will. And if you don't, please sit with it. But I'm sure I will make a discussion just on being in the flow. How do we know when we're in the flow, and how do we know when we're just in a comfort zone? So I will definitely do a video on that as well. So let's get back to today's discussion, resistance, because it's so easy to go off on tangents because everything's kind of interlinked, and I really want to make it very, very clear how we're talking about this. Okay, so if you are unwell, you need to take different actions than what we're talking about today. Okay, today is just understanding resistance and how it impacts our life in a very big way. Okay, so just another little side note, sorry. If you have been in resistance for a long time, you probably have physical symptoms that are going to make you stop, that are going to make you need to take time. And if you can, please honor that as much as you can. Once you're in maybe a better physical state, maybe even emotionally and mentally, then you will be able to start to implement these steps that I'll be talking about today. Okay, so please, I know that I can be talking to a very wide audience, not initially because I'm just new, but once you start to find me. So I just want to make sure that in these discussions, I give you just a little bit of feedback of where you might be at and whether this might be able to help you right now, or whether there's something else you might be able to do first and then come back to this, okay? And I'm always here. Book a one-on-one appointment. If you need more help, please don't hesitate to reach out. So resistance. So with resistance, as I said, it can work, it can impact our physical bodies after we've been in resistance for a long time. But let's go back to what it means. So we've talked a little bit about this push-pull, talked a little bit about how we're not in the flow when we're in resistance, and how we're in kind of this non-acceptance energy. So what does that all mean? And let me give you an example to try and make that a little bit clearer. So let's say that you're in a job that you don't want to be in. There's something else that is calling you that is more important, and you're in a job that you don't like. Now, this energy will build. Okay, so you can be at many different stages of this. And again, this doesn't have to be just about work. It can be about relationships. It can really be about anything. So I'll let you apply this, how it fits within your life. And let's go back to this example about work. Now, in the early stages of this resistance, you might just find things to complain about. Okay, so one sign of resistance is complaining. Another side of resistance is blaming. Okay, so we might blame the job that we're not doing all these other things that we really want to be doing. So this builds unhappiness little by little, and it builds this resistance, because as we start to tap into the blame, the unhappiness, that I don't want to be here. Look at this. There's this about this job that's not great, and there's this about this job. So we start to pick. We start to pull apart this job in a very singular focus. So we're pulling apart this job, and it can be very true. So I'm not saying that the blame, the picking apart, the finding fault is not true, but I want to show how it's not helpful. Okay, so please bear with me. So this picking apart, this blaming the work, we might be saying, I've got to work so many hours. I don't have time to look after myself. I don't have time to do all the other things that I love. Now, what happens when we do that? It builds resistance, because as we focus on those things, they become our focal point. And when something becomes our focal point, I'm making this triangle with my hands, because we're focusing here, but we're forgetting all this. So there's a lot more to your work than your focal point. But your focal point is exactly what that term means. That's where you'll be focusing. So you're going to miss all the rest, which might not be great. It might not be too bad. It might be fairly okay. But when we have a focus point, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anything else is, because our focus is focused. So what does that mean? We've got a focal point. We acknowledge that we're not happy. So why look deeper than that? And the reason is because we probably could not look any deeper if we did something about it. Okay, so I'm going to elaborate on that because that's a big statement. We really have two choices: stay or go. Now, I know that they might not be choices that you can do anything about, but acknowledging that you have a choice is the start, okay? Because resistance lives in the should or have to, okay? Resistance is built because there's a belief that there's an obligation. I have to. And that could be very, very true. You might have to because obviously we need money to live. So a job, it gives us a life, it gives us a lifestyle. So that might be very true. Let's talk about your job. So let's stay on this topic of the job. Well, you need that to pay rent. So the job could very well be a true obligation. Now, I want to look a little bit at obligation because when we feel obliged, we feel like there are no choices. So we feel we're obliged, we have to, and therefore there's no choice in that. But we always have a choice. And I did a couple of videos on choices. So check those out if you want to. But we always have a choice. We might not like our options, but we always have a choice. So with resistance, the first step is knowing that we have a choice. Okay, so what does this acknowledging that we have a choice do? Acknowledging that you have a choice, regardless of whether it's one that you want to make or not, straight away gives you your power back. When we have choices and we acknowledge that we have choices, regardless of whether we want to choose or not, whether we can make those choices or not, they are empowering. Resistance doesn't live with empowerment. If we have choices and we can sit and say, right, you know what? This job, right at this very minute, I can't do anything about it because I need to live. I need to pay my rent. I need to buy my food. I'm staying in this job. You've made a choice. You choose. I choose to stay in this job because I choose to maintain this lifestyle. Resistance will dwindle every time you do that, every time you consciously choose, because I want to make you very aware that not choosing, you've chosen. So even if you don't tell yourself, I choose this job, even if you stay in resistance and say, oh, I hate this job and I blame this job and I've got to do it and I've got no choice, you're staying in that job. So you're still choosing that job. But can you feel how very different these energies are? I choose to stay in this job because I want to maintain my lifestyle versus I've got no choice. I have to, I've got bills. There's a very different energy that we're embracing with those different mindsets, those different, I choose and I have no choice. Now, like I said earlier, why is this important? Why is understanding resistance so important? And it's resistance, and this is my opinion, but resistance It's like dragging the world behind you. Resistance zaps your energy. Resistance kills your creativity. When we are in resistance, we have a focus point, we have blame, unhappiness, and I was going to say nitpicking, but I don't really want to use that term, but more focus point of being unhappy with something. So we find fault. That's a better way to say it. We find fault. That energy is heavy energy. And that energy sits in our mental space, in our emotional space, and in our physical space. So I want you to take a moment and just imagine, and maybe you don't even have to imagine because maybe that's where you are right now. But I want you to imagine how that feels. Mentally, emotionally, and physically. And then we wonder why we're not functioning at our best. We wonder why we don't feel well. We can't think straight. We've just got this heavy energy and we carry that energy with us. We drag it behind us. So let's say that you're listening to this discussion and you find yourself in resistance, or you think, oh, I wonder if I'm in resistance. I feel that one of the best ways you can tell is think about the situation and then ask yourself, do I have a choice? If you have consciously chosen, like I said in the example with your job, if you have consciously said, do you know what? No, you know, this job pays me well and I can live the way I want to live. Right now, this job actually works for me. That's empowering. That energy feels like I am making a conscious choice. I get to choose. In resistance, I have no choice. I've got to stay in this job. It's not good for me. It makes me unhappy. I'm overworked and underpaid. I'm this, I'm that. Very, very heavy energy. Now, please remember, I'm not saying that those things are not true. They could be very true. But what can you choose? So when we have a choice or when we acknowledge that, okay, I have choices through all my life, every aspect of my day-to-day life, every aspect about me interacting with the world, others, I always have a choice. They might not be good choices. They might be just either way, you might feel that you lose or that they're just not good choices. Okay. But can you see how still choosing as opposed to not choosing, but still choosing? Because when we don't choose, we still choose to not choose. And if there's no change, we've chosen to stay where we are. This is hard. This is hard when we're in that space, and we've all been in that space, and we will always be in and out of that space. Sometimes we'll be in the flow and in acceptance, and other times we'll be in resistance. But the quicker we can recognize that we're in resistance, the easier it is on our mental, emotional, and physical self. The longer we stay in resistance, the harder it is and the more symptoms we will eventually show, because We cannot carry this heavy energy with us. We cannot drag this energy behind us and not have symptoms from it. Okay, we're not meant to carry this heavy, dense energy with us and expect it to not have some kind of impact on our mental, emotional, or physical health. So now that we've come to this realization, now that we're looking at resistance, and maybe we say, oh gosh, I really am resistant about this or that in my life, and I really feel that I have no choice in the matter. How do we turn that around? How do we go from resistance to acceptance and flow with what's in front of us? Okay, so we talked about a choice. So we can choose to stay or we can choose to go. We can say yes or we can say no, whatever the choice is in front of us. So it's acknowledging that we have a choice. We've spoken about that. But what if, let's go back to the example of this job. Okay, so acknowledge that I have to stay in that job. Does it mean that the situation changes? No, not necessarily. And probably more so no. But what changes is our perspective. What changes is our mindset. So with this job, when you go into work and you have chosen to be there because it offers you this or that, there'll be a shift. And it'll be very subtle at first. But because you've set your mind on a path of, I need to be here because it gives me this lifestyle that I want to maintain. And it might not even be a lavish lifestyle. It can just literally be paying your bills and putting food on the table. But that's still something. But your mind will shift because your mind will be like, well, I chose this. So I'm going to find things that make my choice valid. That's how our mind works. So if you focus on dislike and hate and dread and the resistance, your mind, because your focal point, your mind will go to that focal point and find everything it can to make that your truth. So if you choose, if you make this job your focal point and go, you know what, this is my focus because this enables me to live the life I need to live right now, you need to lead right now, your mind is going to find things about that job that give you that feedback. This job is good because it's enabling me to live. So you're going to start to notice, oh, I'm getting paid today, yay. Or, other little things. The mind switches from finding fault to finding benefit. And that can be in any way. And not just about work. Obviously, we've chosen this example, but you apply it to how it might fit in your life. So the minute there's that mind shift, we drop the baggage. We drop the drag of resistance because suddenly we're not resisting. We're not saying, I don't want this, but I have to. We're saying, I don't particularly like this, but I'm doing it anyway because it's a means to an end in some way that I deem beneficial for me. So any time that you deem something to be beneficial for you and make that choice on that perspective, on that thought, you will let go of the resistance. Now, resistance, we talked a little bit about your mental, your emotional, and your physical state. So I just want to touch a little bit on that. If you are experiencing certain symptoms or sensations, ailments, let's touch on that a little bit. Headaches, foggy brain, overwhelm, they're all symptoms of resistance. So please, I'm generalizing here. So I do need you to look at your particular situation, how you're going, seek help. Please don't hesitate to seek help. I'm here if you'd like to reach out or to whoever you like to reach out to, but please reach out if you feel you need help. But for this discussion, talking about resistance, those symptoms are really big symptoms of resistance. That drag. Emotionally, we might just be teary all the time. We might be angry. So there could be a world of emotions that we could be feeling, and we can often bounce between them. We can 1 minute feel super angry and the next minute just feel super down and overwhelmed and unhappy. And our physical body is energy. So it can't take with it the energy of the world. This resistance, this drag, it's extremely fatiguing for our body. Resistance is like walking through mud every single day. It's exhausting, and your body will start to show signs of exhaustion. And you might feel that I don't really do that much. I don't, I have all these days of rest. What's happening? I shouldn't be this tired. That's resistance. That's resistance you've been dragging that with you for such a long amount of time. And it's weakening you because it's that drag, it's that weight. And this is why resistance, it's so important for us to recognize it, but also so important for us to be able to find strategic ways to let go of it. Now, with resistance as well, there are times where we're resistant about something little. We might be resistant about, we don't particularly want to go to this party, but we feel obliged and we go, and then the party's finished and the resistance drops. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this type of resistance is because this is a good way for you to start to pick up on the signs. Sometimes when we're really resistant about something, it might be really difficult, especially when it's a big thing in our life. We might find it a little bit harder to dig deep enough to find, okay, where is this resistance and why is it here? So there's a lot of those little things that we might be resistant about. Oh, we don't really want to go to the shops today, but we need to because I've got to get food for tonight's dinner. The minute we go and we're home again, the resistance is gone and we feel, oh, I'm glad I did that. There's a release, there's a letting go, and there's a lightness that comes from that. So that's a good way to start to pick up on the signs of what resistance can feel like. Because sometimes we need to feel it first. Sometimes it's something that's been going on so long for us, we kind of think, oh, yeah, I can see that makes sense, but that doesn't apply to me, or if that doesn't apply to this situation, because it might be something we've been doing for so long that we don't recognize it, and that's okay. So as I've mentioned throughout the whole video, feel free to reach out if you'd like to book a one-on-one appointment with me. As usual, there'll be a meditation, there'll be worksheets, journaling worksheets. I'll put this discussion on Spotify if you'd prefer to listen through Spotify. If you have any questions, if even if you can think of any topics that you would like to discuss, if this has opened up something in you and you have a question and you'd like me to make a discussion on it, please reach out. I'd love that. Put it in the comments, or you can go to my website, theguidancecorner.com.au, and send me a message through that. So I hope this week's discussion on resistance has been helpful. As always, I'm wishing you a wonderful week. Take very good care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.